What if I told you that the two deadliest wars in human history were not started by madmen, emperors, or ideology? What if they were started by a spreadsheet? A balance sheet? An overproduction problem that the most powerful men in the world could not solve any other way? What if the wars that killed 150 million people were not history's greatest tragedies? What if they were history's greatest business decisions? Before you call this a conspiracy theory, stay with me. Because everything in this video is documented. It is in the congressional records. It is in the bank archives. It is in the corporate filings. Nobody hid it very carefully. They just knew that nobody would look. Or that if they looked, nobody would believe it. The most successful crimes are the ones committed in plain sight, dressed up as patriotism. The Industrial Revolution created the most extraordinary problem in human history. It created too much. By 1870, British factories were producing more steel, more coal, more textiles, more weapons than Britain could possibly consume. German factories were doing the same. American factories were doing the same. You cannot simply stop the machines. The machines have investors. The machines have debts. The machines must keep running. But who buys what they make? The answer was colonies. Africa, India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, every corner of the earth was carved up and handed to European powers as a captive market. A place to dump the excess production. A place to extract cheap raw materials. But by 1900 there were no more colonies left to take. Every piece of land on earth was already claimed. The factories were still running. The investors still needed returns. The problem had not gone away. It had gotten worse. Here is what the history books call the cause of World War I. A Serbian nationalist shot an Austrian archduke in Sarajevo in June 1914. Within 6 weeks the entire world was at war. That is what the books say. But ask yourself a simple question. How does one assassination in one city cause 37 nations to declare war on each other within 6 weeks? Unless the guns were already loaded. Unless someone was already looking for a reason to pull the trigger. The guns were already loaded. By 1914, Europe's military-industrial complex had been building weapons at an extraordinary rate for 20 years. Germany had doubled its navy. Britain had doubled its army. France had modernized its artillery. The weapons manufacturers needed a return on that investment. Weapons sitting in warehouses generate no profit. Weapons fired at enemies generate enormous profit. Because after every weapon is fired, you need to build another one. Now here is the fact that should make your blood run cold. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker in American history, personally arranged loans of $500 million to Britain and France in 1915. At interest. If Britain and France won, J.P. Morgan got his money back with interest. If Britain and France lost, J.P. Morgan lost everything. America officially entered WW1 in 1917. 2 years after J.P. Morgan had bet his entire fortune on a British victory. The timing is not a coincidence. It gets worse. The War Industries Board, the American government body that controlled all wartime production, was run by a Wall Street financier named Bernard Baruch. He had the power to set prices, fix quotas, and award contracts. A subsequent congressional investigation found that war profiteers extracted fortunes from the blood of dead soldiers. Baruch himself was said to have personally profited $200 million from his position. $200 million. In 1917. From one war. World War I ended in 1918. The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to be the peace settlement. It was the most perfectly designed sequel in history. Germany was blamed entirely. Forced to pay reparations not fully paid off until 2010. John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of the century, resigned from the British delegation in protest. He said it would destroy Germany within a generation. He was right to the year. Here is the dark humor of it. The factories that built the weapons for WW1 needed a new customer the moment the war ended. Germany, humiliated, bankrupt, furious, was the perfect customer. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, American and British corporations sold Germany everything it needed to rebuild its military. Steel, rubber, oil, aircraft engines. The same industrialists who had just fought Germany were now arming it for the next round. Because the next round meant another generation of contracts. The specific corporations involved are not secret. Ford Motor Company operated factories in Germany throughout WW2, producing trucks for the Nazi army. General Motors owned Opel, which made military vehicles for Hitler. Standard Oil of New Jersey, later renamed Exxon, supplied fuel technology to Germany through a neutral Swiss intermediary even after America entered the war. IBM provided the punch card systems that the Nazis used to process Holocaust victims. These are not allegations. These are documented facts from corporate archives and congressional investigations. The Great Depression began in 1929. Governments tried everything. Roosevelt's New Deal spent billions. 9 years later, unemployment was still 17%. Then WW2 began. By 1944, unemployment was 1%. The war did not just end the Depression. It ended it overnight. Because war is the one thing a capitalist economy will spend unlimited money on, without asking whether it makes sense. The numbers make the case so clearly it is almost embarrassing. American national debt in 1940, $43 billion. American national debt in 1945, $260 billion. Every single dollar of that debt was borrowed from banks. At interest. The greatest economic stimulus in American history was paid for by the American people, through taxes and debt, and collected by the financial institutions that had spent 20 years positioning themselves to profit from exactly this moment. The soldiers died. The bankers billed. So who actually won World War II? Not the 50 million who died. Not the cities reduced to rubble. Not the 6 million Jews murdered. The winners emerged from the rubble with more power than before. The American military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower himself warned about in his 1961 farewell address, came out of WW2 with government contracts that have never ended. The war economy did not stop in 1945. It just renamed itself the defense budget. What if the wars had been cancelled? What if in 1914 some impossible combination of sanity and courage had stopped the machinery? What does the world look like? First, the overproduction crisis is still unsolved. The factories still running. Investors still needing returns. Capitalism in 1914 had no peaceful mechanism to solve this. No welfare state. No consumer economy. The crisis that created the wars would have created something else. Possibly worse. Or possibly, without wars to distract them, workers of the world solved the problem themselves. Because the wars did something nobody talks about. They killed the socialist movements of Europe at exactly the moment they were about to succeed. In 1914, socialist parties across Europe were the fastest growing political movement on the continent. The war gave factory owners the perfect solution. It sent the workers to the front and buried the socialist movement in the mud of the Somme. Without the wars, the socialist movements of 1914 might have transformed capitalism peacefully. Henry Ford understood this. He doubled his workers' wages in 1914, saying, "If my workers cannot afford my cars, nobody will buy my cars." The wars prevented capitalism from learning that lesson for 30 years. And cost 150 million lives in the process. The most expensive lesson never learned. Are the wars still happening? Not WW1 and WW2, those ended. But the system that created them. The overproduction problem did not end in 1945. The military-industrial complex has spent 80 years finding new wars to justify its existence. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Every one preceded by a defense industry lobbying campaign. Every one generating billions in contracts. The names change. The mechanism does not. The world you live in was built on the rubble of two wars, enormously convenient for the people who profited from them. The soldiers were brave. And they were also used. Both things are true simultaneously. Heroism and manipulation can coexist. They almost always do. The most important question is not whether the soldiers were heroes. They were. The question is, who sent them there? And why? Everything in this video is documented. Congressional records. Bank archives. Corporate filings. Nobody hid it carefully. They knew nobody would look. History in Multiverse does not tell you what to think. It shows you what the record contains, and asks whether the story you were taught was the whole story. The factories needed markets. The markets needed wars. The wars needed soldiers. The soldiers needed a reason. Patriotism was always the cheapest thing to manufacture.